Hi, I'm Holly Greer with the Alachua County Environmental Protection Department, and this is the Water Wisdom Series. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about wetlands, and this is a great place to do it. We are at Paynes Prairie. This is Paynes Prairie State Park, and we have a beautiful wetland behind us. There's a lot of action here. Wildlife's really moving. I just heard an alligator bellowing. Maybe we can spot him later. So let's talk about wetlands.
So what is a wetland? This can be tricky. Wetlands are hard to describe because they can look so different from place to place. Wetlands are found all over the world in all kinds of regions. They can be found in the middle of fields and forests, near oceans, lakes, and rivers, and they can look very different in each area. To make it even more complicated, sometimes wetlands can appear dry. Wetlands do have some things in common that help scientists to identify them. They look at the water, at the soil, and at the plants. First, let's talk about the water. Wetlands are places that are wet or where the soil is moist for at least part of the year. Wetland soil is called hydric soil. Hydric soils hold water longer than other soils, and they don't have much oxygen. This lack of oxygen can create chemical reactions that make colors and textures in hydric soil that are unique from other soils. The plants growing in wetlands are hydrophilic, or they are adapted to wet or moist conditions. There are many different kinds of plants that grow in wetlands depending on their location. Some plants grow on the surface of the water, some grow in the water, and some grow along the banks, but they are all adapted to wet conditions. If a wetland is not covered with water all of the time, the plants there have to be able to live through these changing conditions of wet and dry. Wetlands were once considered useless mosquito-infested places. Many wetlands were drained and sometimes they were turned into farmland. Almost half of the wetlands in Florida were lost between the 1780s and 1980s. Fortunately, over time, scientists began to study wetlands, and now we understand they are important places we should protect. Why do you think wetlands are important? What do you think scientists discovered in their research? Let's use a model to look at some of the reasons why wetlands are so important. Here on our model, we have a neighborhood. There's also a shopping center with a parking lot. It looks like they may be planning on adding more stores or a neighborhood back here with all this construction. This is a wastewater treatment plant. And here is a farm with some cattle, and we can see some crops growing. We have creeks running through the community and the roads we travel on, and we have a body of water here down at the low spot of the model. Water will naturally flow from higher places to lower places. Water from our creeks will flow downhill to this lowest body of water. Pollution is often carried into our creeks, and many of our creeks lead to sinkholes, or on the model, this plug. Sinkholes lead to the aquifer below, where we get all of our water from, including the water we drink. Let's talk about the different kinds of pollution that may be picked up by water as it travels. Even though this wastewater treatment plant does a great job cleaning up our water, there is still some pollution left when that water is released. When we know where pollution is coming from, it's called point source pollution because we can point to the source. There's also non-point source pollution, where we can't point to one source, it's happening all over. Chemicals like fertilizer or pesticide, sometimes used on farms or in our yards, is one example. Trash that may be found along the road or on the ground is another example, or oil leaking from cars onto the street. Even pet waste left on the ground can be carried into water as it travels. Dirt can also be a source of pollution that gets carried into our water. Now there's a lot of pollution on the ground. Where do you think it will go when it rains? It can travel into creeks and sometimes across land, and in our model, it's headed downhill towards the sinkhole. Let's place some wetlands in our model and see how they help clean up the water that will travel down to the low spot, to the sinkhole, and to our groundwater in the aquifer below. Now it's time to make it rain, but before we do, let's add one more wetland. This is a tiny Sweetwater Wetlands given to us from the park staff. Sweetwater Wetlands is a human-created wetland you'll learn more about in our next episode. Now we'll make it rain and see what happens to all of the pollution on the surface of the land. You can see the pollution is headed downhill, but there's wetlands here. Let's see how the wetlands help. Wetlands are like these sponges. They absorb a lot of water, and that can help prevent flooding in our communities. Wetlands can also filter pollution. Look at all of the pollution that would have ended up traveling to our sinkhole and to the aquifer below. Without these wetlands, let's see how the water travels down the sinkhole, carrying all of that pollution with it. This container represents the aquifer. Our groundwater is stored in the aquifer below. Remember, this is our drinking water and the water we use for all of our other needs. Wetlands are like a sponge. They absorb water and they can help prevent flooding in our communities. Wetlands filter pollution. They capture dirt. Pollution can be filtered through soil, or plants may absorb nutrients and other chemicals, preventing them from reaching our groundwater in the aquifer below. So now we know wetlands are important because they protect water quality and help to prevent flooding. But let's talk about a few other reasons wetlands are important. Wetlands provide important habitat or a place to live for wildlife. Other animals may not live in the wetlands, but they may visit wetlands as a source of food or shelter. All kinds of wildlife can be found in wetlands, from tiny animals that live in the water or soil to all kinds of insects, birds, mammals, amphibians, and reptiles. That brings me back to the very large reptile we heard at Payne's Prairie. This is what it sounded like. We were able to follow the sound and trace it to its source. Wetlands are an important place for birds. Lots of birds make their homes in wetlands, and there is a lot of food to be found there. Wetlands also provide important resting places or temporary homes for birds that migrate. Every year, sandhill cranes migrate to Payne's Prairie. It's a place where they can find food and refuge for the season. You might have heard them flying over. And here they are, feasting at the prairie. Another reason wetlands are important is they can provide a nursery for wildlife, from birds to fish to frogs, toads, and alligators. These are a place where young animals can grow up. Wetlands are also important because they're a place where people can visit to view wildlife, to relax and unwind, and enjoy some nature time. We've covered just a few of the reasons why wetlands are so important. I hope you'll take the opportunity to explore all the many other reasons wetlands are important and visit some of those we're lucky enough to have in our community. Join us again next week and learn about Sweetwater Wetlands Park.